Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Falling through the clouds from 1,000 miles. It's like I'm never gonna hit the ground. Soldier on the red
Vos ordres,
line.
maître.
It's up to you. Love is not the night time.
L'invocation m'affaiblit. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. Je ferai selon vos ordres. L'invocation est accomplie.
Le pacte est signé.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez. Que le combat commence. Ma patience a des limites. Par mon cou. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis. Vite. Vous me demandez. Je suis l'enfer. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma passion. Joie. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Pour Ner'zhul. Que le combat commence. Enfin. Ma patience a des limites.
Plus de mana.
Ta haine me rend plus fort. À vos ordres. Par mon cou.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Pour le roi Lich. À vos ordres. combat commence.
Aux ordres, amélioration terminée.
Vous me demandez.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Voulez-vous un cocktail qui dépote?
Vous me demandez.
Je suis tout redoutable.
Enfin.
Un héros allié a succombé.
Enfin.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Que le combat commence. Enfin. Ma patience a des limites.
Je ferai ce que vous ici.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Le démon a survécu. L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma patience a des limites. Ta haine me rend plus fort.
Je suis au service de Nerzol. Selon
Vous me demandez. Que le combat commence. Enfin.
l'invocation est accomplie.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Ils nous envahissent pour Kalimdor.
Ma patience a des limites.
Amélioration terminée.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez.
Recherche terminée.
Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez.
Un héros allié a succombé.
Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites.
Je suis au service de Nerzol.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Je sers. Recherche est attaquée.
Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Que le combat commence. Ma patience a des limites.
Vous avez adoré, mademoiselle.
Nos forces sont attaquées. Les infidèles attaquent notre ville. Nos forces sont attaquées. Dressez plus de ziggurats.
La patience a des limites.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Quoique je ne sois avec plaisir.
Ma patience a des limites. Patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez quelle vengeance accomplie. J'écoute.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Vous me demandez.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma patience a des limites.
Je suis au service de personne.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Vous me demandez.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. Que le combat commence. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Je ne peux pas invoquer ici.
Vous me demandez. À vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites.
Nos forces sont attaquées. Ma vie recherche terminée. Je sais.
Ma patience a des limites. Patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Demandez. Pour le roi Lee. Ma patience a des limites.
Passez de la menace.
Vous me demandez.
Je ferai selon vos ordres. Avec plaisir. Je ne peux pas
Vous me demandez. Je suis
vie pour nous.
Aux ordres. À vos ordres. Le froid à nos bouches. La vraie roche. Je suis au service de Ner'zhul.
pour vous servir.
It's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma vie pour Ner'zhul.
L'invocation est accomplie.
It's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood.
L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie.
Vos ordres, maître.
It's alive, it's pumping blood. It's your heart, it's alive, it's
Il faut plus d'or. Qu'y a-t-il? Par les esprits.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Qui menace la nature? Naturellement, il sera fait selon vos ordres. La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Le pacte est signé. À vos ordres.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Pour le roi Lich.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Il est temps qu'il en sera ainsi.
Vous me demanderez. Je suis l'enfer. Ma patience
Un
a des
héros
limites.
allié a succombé.
À vos ordres. Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Enfin.
Vous avez ça.
À vos ordres.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites. Enfin. Quelle vengeance accomplie. À vos ordres. Je suis
Pour vous servir. La
Que
ville
le
de nos
combat
frères
commence.
est attaquée.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Par mon coup.
What is going on, guys? Hope you guys are doing well today. I want to give you guys a little bit of a showcase on the final weapon unlock for the assault class in BF5. But before I get into that, I want to quickly share with you guys my Instagram and my Twitter account, as the reason for that is there's
before and fold equity, you've less chance of stealing the blinds, what 15% of hands looks like, what 21% of hands looks like, and art in solo poker is making adjustments 765, make sure it's not paying loads of reasons for you guys so you know why you're doing what you're doing. Wait, pop, big gun and raise 2-3 big blinds, which is standard size for this position, more about that later. Ace XX, Ace King 3. Three-way pots are obviously in between, they're not terrible but they're not great. When it starts to go like mass multi-way, like 4 or 5-way, pot is nowhere near as big on this flop as it would be heads up. Same thing with queens, although it's a bit better. So our aware opponents know this. They know that we need more strength to bet multi-way. So we find big blinds, and a small blind who has been noted to be loose and passive, just the kind of opponent you want to play against, right? A loose passive in our hand, many people to act, but I guess the main reason for raising is not quite field thinning, though it is important, but it's value. It's building a pot so that we know that when we flop well with a good hand, is to make you post blinds. If there were no blinds in poker, there'd be very little action. Everyone would wait for aces. It would be the most dull, boring game ever. The fact that there is this incentive out there to get people raising, for people to win, what sizing we're going to use. We want to, and our large sizing helps us achieve this. And it does it more often when there's 5 players still to act. So with we kind of just take that measure in advance by make. So in late position, you're more like we can fold it and only lose 5 bucks play. So thinning and our large sizing helps us achieve this. And it does it more often when there's 5 players still to act. So with 5 players more to act, we need to size up in anticipation of people wanting to call, or if there being a kind of domino effect value versus big blinds wide range. Here we've got, it's the first of our steal 3.5 big blinds, because we felt that there were a lot of players to get through. There was a chance of a domino calling here. 5 should do. The more money that we can win from villain stack, the less that we make it pre-flop, the more money that stays behind in the stack, which is really good for a lot of the hands in our range. So if we want to call small blinds 3-bet, which might be to like $15 or $20, having more money relatively left behind gives us a better price to do so, because it means if we hit 2 pair here, hit a flush, hit a straight, we're getting paid off more relative to that investment that we're having to make. So in late position, you're more likely to get attacked when you open, right? There is a big difference between where and when to use different sizes. This is a good spot to just go 5 bucks for these reasons. So in summary, use 2.5 big blinds as a compromise between thinning the field, because it is, we call that, 2 situations, but there is a time and a place for it for sure. Let's have a look at when that is. So here we've got ace 3 off, not a very good hand, but one that in the button when we're playing, remember we're playing that 40 to 60% range, aren't we? So we're going to be opening a lot of wider hands, as we saw in the so on the button, although we do have just 2 players to get through, right, and a lot of fold equity, so we don't have to thin the field all the time just by the regulars behind, which we will in tougher games for sure. We will lose the minimum if we hold a part of our range at once. The field is already thinned by those 3 folds there. We don't have to sizings the various. You guys, a cool concept I actually wrote in one of my books that I used to explain it. So stay tuned, keep watching the series, and you will get a lot better at 6 max cash. Jump into the games, have fun, try out these opening strategies. I'll see you next time. Best luck at the tables. See you soon.
Chances that I ain't gonna blow this chance.
What's up, guys? This is Pete, and welcome to part 2 of Basics of 6 Max Cash. Today we're moving on to probably the second most common situation that you're likely to face, at least at the lower stakes of 6 Max Cash games, and that is dealing with limpers. I say at lower stakes because obviously limping is a phenomenon that becomes less and less common as we move through the stakes, and certainly if you're in a tougher game at higher levels, you're not going to see people limp as the first person into the pot, really ever. We saw that last time actually, when we talked about why raising was so important. I will not measures to thin the field. Back and watch if you create a domino raise the normal that's used with a limper. So let's to yourself. The pots are already kind of back and watch if you haven't seen part 1, or refresh if you're a bit hazy about it. Cut off folds onto the button, and with queen 10 off here we decide to go ahead and actually make a 4x raise, 4 times the big blind, 4 times the limp, to $8. So what's going on here? Well, our ISO seeks to accomplish one of the following 3 favourable outcomes. We could take all the juicy dead money right now pre-flop. That's good for us, isn't it? Just being able to pick up those big blinds and just to get slowly feed ourselves, negate losses that we ourselves incur when we are in the blinds, and that sort of thing. If we do happen to win this pot pre-flop, we will not be complaining, especially with a hand as sort of meager as queen 10. We successfully isolate the hijack and then c-bet to win the pot there and then. So this is a very, what I would call a common branch. I mean, it's not a success rate, very favourable runouts even with one pair, and there are of course times when we make sure you do need to have limping. You need to be filling up the triangle you're about to see by having a good combination. The triangle doesn't need to be completely full, it does need to have reasonable amount of these factors injected into it. So what fold equity generally if we don't have the next factor, which is frequent strength. Fold equity and frequent strength are kind of inversely proportionate in terms of requirement. So that's to say that the more fold equity hero has, meaning how often, they'll be very true all with hole cards, even if they're both different and unpaired or even high, it doesn't matter. Most of the time you will not flop a pair. So frequent strength basically just means that the hand can flop good pairs. So because we flop pairs rarely, we want to flop what these as then take check of what happens. So betting is lightly because that's not in the nature of a net. Net, by the way, is just a term for a tighter player, a very tight player actually. Frequent strength is not so great here, but with fold equity being so favourable, we do not need a great deal of it just to playable hand. That's the key. These things are inversely proportionate. If you have a lot of one, you do not need much of the other. Sure, we only have a 9 and a 7. It is suited, that helps frequent strength slightly. It's not the main core component to frequent strength. Suitedness is a slight benefit, as it is with most other core, even 9-7, presenting a hand that you don't. Clue, which is that this player is very mad and very unlikely to want to press the fold button anytime soon. It's also very likely that Angry Chatter's range here is extremely wide, given that he's not happy and is calling behind another player. So fold equity is almost non-existent. We're likely to get 3-bet often because look behind us, we've also got an avid raiser in the big blind who will probably attack our limps a lot and will also 3-bet if we choose to raise some amount of the time. Avid raiser is probably so fond of raising that they're not too bothered that Angry Chatter never folds, or they will just use a stronger range of hands that's still quite wide and still equates to us getting 3-bet quite often. So that means that fold equity is very poor. There's very few branches on the tree of EV here where we actually end up seeing the flop heads up with one player with fold equity. Even if we get one of these guys heads up, luckily, which will happen hardly ever, we will still have not much fold equity against them because they are stubborn players. Our frequent strength is poor. We have a king and a 7 that's offsuit. There's no offsuit. There's no suited or connected benefit to this hand. The hand will be very bad multi-way. We can't stand a 3-bet. Frequent strength is bad. Fold equity is bad. When both of the first two factors are bad, isolating is just never going to be viable. It doesn't matter that we're in position. Alone, this is not enough to counterbalance the two main factors being very ensure that multi-way applied again. Here are some extra bits of advice though. Add one further big blind if there's a particularly sticky player in the pot. Now remember, that doesn't justify isolating that king 7 off, just because we're going to make it bigger, because we're still not going to get any fold equity even with a bigger sizing on that last table that was just full of people who didn't want to fold. So if you think you've got enough fold equity plus frequent strength plus position and you do want to ISO, this is just then saying size up if you've already come to that conclusion. It's not saying if you make it big you can justify an ISO that the triangle didn't allow you to justify. That's not okay. If the triangle says it's alright though, or your assessment of the triangle says it's okay, then you can size up a bit and that'll help. If there's a sticky player, it'll help you get heads up with that player help you extract value later, and all the things that thinning the field, all the benefits that brings. Subtract 1 BB if a shovable short stack is involved. You don't want to lose extra money the times you get shoved on. You'll be isolating, in many cases a lot of hands don't want to call a 20 big blind shove, so if you have that kind of shorter stack around that might be shoving over, just keep your sizing down and maybe tighten your range up a little bit. That loses you the minimum when you actually get shoved on, and you still have plenty of room to build the pot and get all in against that player post flop if they call instead. So there's really no reason to go big there. Just subtract a big blind, streamline it, and it makes sense. Also, and finally, subtract 1 big blind if there are active 3-betters behind. Again, similar principle, minimizing our losses in the times when we do have to fold, knowing that we're less likely to get called by these players. They prefer entering the pot aggressively if at all, therefore there's no reason to size up to deter them from entering. Rather keep your sizing down, because when they 3-bet you, you will lose less if you have to fold. You'll give yourself more room to defend, especially if you're in position. You'll improve your implied odds and your pot odds. When you're facing that kind of 3-bet, these things will be better for you. Implied odds just being the amount of money you're risking compared with what you might win if you make a big hand. So yeah, all these little things will just improve your EV over time. So these things don't make or break you in one hand, but if you get all of this right over thousands and thousands and millions of hands, you'll just have a way higher expected outcome. Finally, limping behind. I thought we never limped. This guy's clearly confused. Well, don't worry, there's a clear definition here that can separate two types of limping. We never open limp. We do rarely limp behind. Limping behind just means limping after one or more players have already limped. In that case, the pot's more likely to go multi-way anyway, and a lot of hands just are kind of favoured towards that, like small pocket pairs, small suited connectors. Hands without high frequent strength might just want to give themselves a maximum price, give themselves the best price, I should say, that they can possibly give themselves. So limping and investing 1 big blind to try to flop a set is obviously better than limping and investing, or raising and investing 5 big blinds to then still have to play kind of fit or fold on the flop anyway if you end up going 3 or 4 way, or if you're in the hand with sticky players or whatever. Here's an example. We have a very bad player in the big blind. That's the first thing that catches our eye when we look at that table, or at least that's the first thing I look at. I think very bad player, start to salivate slightly, and you know, the general poker player kind of predatory reaction, I suppose. We have a calling station, and we have another player who's along a similar vein, but we've got a more specific note on this player that he just can't fold top pair. We've probably seen this individual call down top pair in lots of spots where it's just highly unadvisable to do so. So here, what's going to happen if we raise? Well, it's similar to the hand where we had the King-7. It's just that our hand's a lot different now. It's a better hand. It's actually more playable, but it's still not a high frequent strength hand. 4s is actually a very low frequent strength hand that likes to get into pots for cheap, make a set and then get paid off and lose the minimum all those times, almost 9 out of 10 times when it bricks and doesn't make that set. So why invest $10 here to have to give up all the times you miss anyway, when you will just simply have third pair, an under pair with 2 outs to improve against a better pair, and all the draws or even overcards will be so live against you. This hand flops really, really bad equity whenever it misses its set, so it wants to keep its price down from making that set, so limping behind in this kind of situation is actually fantastic. To summarise, no fold equity and poor frequent strength, but a hand with nutted potential makes limping very viable, especially if you don't think you're going to get raised by the blinds very often. Okay guys, that was episode 2 on isolating. Stay tuned, more poker content coming next week. We're going to move on to post-flop and start to talk about notions like c-betting and value betting and all kinds of cool stuff like that next. Hope you're enjoying the series so far, and this will be being released incrementally if you're following along, or maybe you're just watching it all as it's all been posted, in which case make your way through it, and I hope you enjoy. Alright guys, thank you very much, and best of luck at the tables. Bye for now. What's up everyone, this is Pete and I'm back for episode number 3 of Basics of 6 Max Cash. Hope you've been enjoying the series so far, and as usual I'll just state that if you've not seen episodes 1 and 2, highly recommend that you go back and check them out and watch this series in order, because you'll get the most out of it by doing it that way. Okay, so today we're actually taking a break from the pre-flop stuff that we've been looking at so far. There are a few good reasons for this. What I'm trying to do in this series is actually work through things in order of commonness, so that's to say what we're doing here is trying to really get our teeth into the spots that we're most likely to encounter first of all, because we want to build our game from the bottom up, from common to rare, so that if you can handle the more common, mundane spots, your win rate becomes more solid in those sort of situations, and then we leave the more flamboyant, rare, exciting things until we've got like the nuts and bolts down, although in this series I will be careful not to go into too much detail, and I'll try and simplify things as much as possible, but things will get a bit more complicated as we move towards post-flop. So we will come back to concepts like 3-betting, facing 3-bets, and blind defense, which are the more complex meat of the pre-flop part of the syllabus, if you like. But for now, we're moving into c-betting, which is by far the most common post-flop decision that you'll ever have to make. And if you think back to episodes 1 and 2, where most of the time when we enter the pot, we're actually doing it as the aggressors, so we're thinning the field, we have the initiative, we have the pre-flop raiser's uncapped range, and then we get to make a decision on the flop with that raising range. We usually get checked to. Whenever that happens, sometimes we get led out into, or donked into if you like. We're not going to be talking about those situations today. Rather, today we're going to talk about being checked to as is run of the mill and deciding if we can make a continuation bet, or more colloquially known as a c-bet in the poker community. So we're going to first off start by meeting the c-bet and just talk a little bit about exactly what a c-bet is and what it looks like, how to recognize it, and how to recognize an opportunity for making that bet. We're then going to move on to talk about the various reasons for which we might c-bet. They're not always bluffs. There are many different reasons that you can c-bet for, and different ways that you can actually gain expected value by making a c-bet, and there are also times when you don't want to make a c-bet as well. And we're going to talk a little bit towards the end of this video about board texture and strategy. I'm not going to be fleshing out complete flop strategies right now, because talking about exactly what to do with your range and how to split it up, what combinations to put in what parts, can be quite cumbersome, detailed, and difficult. So as this is a basic series, we're more going to talk in terms of general principles about what kind of vague strategies we want to deploy with our range on different kinds of board textures. So that's our board texture and strategy segment, which will be a little bit of an interlude into range thinking, or an intro into range thinking I should say, and it'll be an interlude from just always thinking about what the hand in front of us is doing. We're going to be moving away from that kind of vacuum thinking a little bit in this episode, and talking at the end about what does our range want to do here, what parts of it, how often does it want to bet, what kinds of hands might want to bet. But like I say, we will be keeping it nice and kind of vague and simplified for now, just because it's more important at this time to understand the concepts and how to apply them loosely than it is to go into extremely high detail and build exact ranges that you don't actually understand. One of the biggest mistakes I see, coaches, poker players make, all kinds of study groups make, is that they just try to memorize lots of charts and ranges without understanding why they're doing it. That doesn't leave any room for flexibility or adaptation. It's not the best way to go. So let's get a bottom-up learning model instilled here, where we can actually understand the fundamentals and then use those to branch out and adapt to different situations. And that's very much the way that my book, The Grinder's Manual, was written. It was written in that same vein of getting the fundamentals and the factors down first, and then being a real poker thinker, not just someone that follows strategies that they've read or watched or heard about. So let's meet the c-bet. So c-bet, short for continuation bet, is any bet made on the flop by the pre-flop aggressor. And I just want to take this time to quickly differentiate between a bet and a raise. A bet is when the pot has nothing has yet happened on that street. So post-flop, you can only bet if no one else has put money into the pot yet. So if it's checked to you, you can bet, or if you're first to act post-flop, you can bet. If someone else has bet, so like the example I was talking about earlier, where someone leads out, someone makes a donk bet, then you would not be able to continuation bet. It would be a raise that you'd actually be making there, and that would be raising a donk bet, and that's again not what we're talking about today. We're talking about betting, i.e. the pot has not had any money injected to it on the current post-flop street, and we are the first ones that can actually do that. Might be checked to us, we might be first to act. So here's a very just crude raw example of what a c-bet actually is. We have the small blind, we have the big blind, it's folded round to these two, so they'll now play heads up. Small blind from out of position opens to 3 big blinds. Big blind calls the 2 big blinds, making the pot 6, and 2 players see the flop of King, Queen, 4, Rainbow. And the small blind bets 3.5 big blinds. This is a normal c-bet, that's very run of the mill, there's not really much to say about it, we don't know what small blind's hand is. Again, welcome to range thinking. We're going to be doing this more and more, you're going to be left in the dark more and more as this series progresses, though don't worry, we will very often be looking at actual hole cards as well. But here, the point is that these 2 cards that small blind has could be a wide array of things. They're not necessarily going to always be top pair, the nuts, 2 pair, etc. There may be some draws in there like Jack 10, Jack 9, with some backdoor flush draws like Jack 9 with 2 diamonds, Ace Jack. Who knows? Some players even see bet wider than that here. There are even some strategies that involve always betting, like no matter what you have, on certain very, very favourable board textures. We're going to talk more about board textures and when that might be applicable later. And the big blind folds, as he often will, and small blind wins a pot. So a lot of the money that we make in poker is what we call red line money. And red line money is basically money that is made out with of showdown. So it's not a showdown, it's from the other players in the pot all folding. We talked about this already when we steal, and we'll talk about it later on in the series when we 3-bet and 4-bet and things like that. How there's fold equity there, and we can pick up pots and fuel this source of our win rate. But a very, very common, or the most common way that it happens post flop is just that we make continuation bets. Our opponent folds because they didn't connect to the flop, and we pick up the pot. So it's one of the uttermost fundamental skills of No Limit Hold'em 6 max cash to be able to make c-bets without particularly strong holdings in the right situations against the right opponents on the right board textures. And that's what today's video is all about, is understanding when it's okay to do that, why you might do that, there's always a why where there's a what, and when it's not okay and when you should avoid it. Reasons to c-bet. Firstly, we're going to talk about c-bet bluffing, which is what people normally think about when they think, oh, he's just making a continuation bet here. They often think that their opponent is just betting with nothing, and that may well be the case, but there's all different shades of nothing, ranging from draws to bad pairs that are still often good, to absolute air, to hopeless hands with 2 outs. There's all different kinds of c-bet bluffs, and some boards and some opponents in some situations are a lot more favourable for that kind of play, a c-bet bluff, than others. I'm going to talk about a c-bet bluff today. I almost don't even want to call it a bluff because it is just one of the most fundamental ways that you can c-bet. It's just so standard that there's nothing really fancy or exciting about it. It's not like running a massive complicated bluff to own your opponent's soul in some very interesting spot with interesting dynamic. It's just a run-of-the-mill continuation bet, and it will pick up the pot a lot. Against a good player, against a bad player, it's just a staple of your poker diet. Semi-bluffing is similar, but there you have more equity. You don't have a made hand, but you have equity to improve to the best hand. Usually when you have a draw that draws to a very strong hand that will beat the pairs your opponent is likely to call your c-bet with. Value is fairly straightforward, and actually next lesson is all about value betting in general, but you guys are going to get a little bit of an intro, a little bit of a flavour for it today, as we're going to discuss c-betting for value. Very different to making just a normal continuation bet for the sake of continuing and picking up the pot. The value c-bet you actually want to get called, what constitutes value, what hands would classify value in different spots, etc, etc. Protection is a concept that people misunderstand all the time. One of the most troublesome concepts for the beginner player. We're going to make sure that you understand this correctly. What's up guys? This is Pete and welcome to part 2 of Basics of 6 Max Cash. Today we're moving on to probably the second most common situation that you're likely to face, at least at the lower stakes of 6 Max Cash games, and that is dealing with limpers. I say at lower stakes because obviously limping is a phenomenon that becomes less and less common as we move through the stakes, and certainly if you're in a tougher game at higher levels, you're not going to see people limp as the first person into the pot really ever. We saw that last time actually when we talked about pre-flop raise made in order to thin the field and try to play a pot heads up with a limper. There's a lot more to an ISO than this. There's a lot of other, I say very powerful, but it is a negate range here, which means that he doesn't have very good hands for the most part. Some people do trap limp, but that's kind of rarer phenomenon, and we'll deal with that a bit later on. It's not even post flop against just one opponent. So strength hero needs than smaller that's going to hit the flop quite well. It can flop well, but it definitely doesn't have a lot of frequent strength like we were just talking about. Fold, and the players ahead of us are not likely to interfere we should pick up the pot a lot by the flop. So we can kind of assume that cutoff is passive. Okay, it's not, we don't have any direct read there in bold underneath flop, so that's when people... Let's look on the tree. Other factors here. This is a base guideline to sort of give you a foothold in ISO sizing. You can violate this based on other kind of bits of information that may well come your way, and that'll help. This will just improve your 5 big blinds that he just can't fold top pair. We've probably seen this individual call down top pair in lots of spots where it's just highly unadvisable to do so. So here, what's going to happen if we raise? Well, it's similar to the hand where we pots flops the least increment you're following along, or maybe you, in which case, make your way through it, and I hope you enjoy. Alright guys, thank you very much. Fundamentals and the factors down the street, and we are the first ones that can actually do that. Might be checked to us, we might be first to act. So here's a very just true play heads fundamentals, and then use those to branch out and adapt to different situations. And that's very much the way that my book, The Grounders Manual, was written. It was written in that same. The raise. A bet is when the pot has nothing has yet happened on that street. So post flop, you can only bet if no one else has put money into the pot yet. So if it's checked to you, you can bet, or if you're first to act post flop, you can bet. If someone else has bet, and the small blind bets 3.5 big blinds. This is a normal C bet. That's very run of the mill. There's not really much to say about it. We don't know what small blind's hand is. Again, welcome to range thinking. We're going to be doing this more and more. You're going to be left in the dark more and more as this series progresses. And the big blind folds as we pick up the bet here. They often think that their opponent is just betting with interest in, so it's not quite so good, but it is still clearly going to be a steal on the button, like we talked about in episode. To be folding quite a lot here. Why? Because they 3-bet pre-flop with a lot of the hands that actually hit that ace on the board there. See that ace? They roll over. We don't really have any, so our equity is very low if villain does happen to call us with the higher part of his range with that top pair kind of hand. Obviously we can outdraw like pocket 8s or a 7 or something like that sometimes, but which is going to be by 8, and that means that we have a required fold equity of 31.5%. That means that if villain actually folds 31.5%, then we have already broken even if we never improve to the best 9 doesn't been called, and things like that. As it is here, we unfortunately get... I just mean it's a lot bigger than most of the things that you'll flop. We are still going to lose the pot most of the time at showdown, because when we actually just start checking here and playing passively and hoping to see free cards, they won't help. They won't help us more often than they will help us. So usually we'll miss those free cards if we do get to see them, or if we check call, we might end up putting money in against king high, gaining out hands that would beat you on a lot of runouts like king high, queen high, 10 high, ace high. It's when he calls, when they first come to me for coaching. the belief that if villain continues to our bet, we will be ahead of his range. So value c-betting is not just, I think I have the best hand. It's not quite that simple. We can now, you'll save yourself a lot of headache in future of making kind of unjustified value bets where there is actually no value, and you just buy enough here, worse hands to value bet here. Now that would mean that villain is calling us with enough hands that could be that. You're improving our EV by eliminating the times when we lose the pot due to the turn and river cards improving villain's hand, or causing us to fold the best hand later on. So that's quite a mouthful, but essentially what it means is that we are getting fold equity here, so we are still looking for a fold, but it's not against hands that are actually beat denies equity to hands or think your opponent's range is, but more often this is also a flop on which most of our pairs want a lot of protection, because even if we have a very strong hand here like pocket sevens on this board, which is a very good hand, then it needs to protect. So we make a lot of protection bets, a lot of still c-bettable with a white. We want to mix things up against a good player. Raised with just a hand like 10-9. 10-9 here is very often going to be a check for me, not against a very weak passive calling station player, but against someone aggressive. I do not want to get raised when I'm holding like Jack 10, Queen 10, 10-9, etc. 8-9, like Ace 8. A lot of these hands I'm going to check back with, I'm going to a little bit more. So the idea is that as you, we are expected to have pocket aces in our range, but you will still bluff sometimes too. Using your opponent is not a big deal to try and confuse people when ranges are that wide. It's just not going to have a big impact on misleading your opponent or gaining EV. Don't try to bewilder your pick up that. Here we may see bet unselectively. The board is so dry that we can basically bet all of the time, and we're protected by the fact that we have a better range than villain. That's to say that in theory, in the land of poker, you know, highly theoretical kind of poker analysis, there's no actual balanced strategy that villain can use to beat us when we see bet all of the time here, because his range is too weak and our range is too strong. So I think we should take shortcut as villain's range starts to connect a lot harder. So on wet boards, villain can actually hit a lot more stuff. Like, he is not necessarily 3-betting Jack 10 out of the big blind. By villain, we will not do very well, and we need to be very careful to will encounter less fold equity and just need to hit our hand more often as a result of that. So villain is connected well enough here that we can get punished for making careless c-bets. We will bet only with good semi-bluffs and stronger value hands. So again, with like a 10 here, like King 10, it probably doesn't make much sense to bet because you can't stand a raise. You could get semi-bluff raised. You're not going to get many streets of value. Scare off his worse hands and stop us getting any more value with our pocket kings. So it's very important to play our bigger hands a lot faster on a flop like this and put more money in when we bet, because it might be now or never when it comes to actually getting value from villain's worse hands. Alright, that's all for today, guys. I will see you on the next. Bye for now. You're going to find it very learner student in good shape against villain's range or something like that if he or she calls. That's a good definition, right? We're actually thinking ahead. We're not just looking at what we think our equity is right now against villain's range per se. We have a good answer. So you've got vision, lots of worse hands here that can call. It's like 6-7, 8-7, these kind of floats, ace-3, ace-2 suited, a 9, a 5, pocket bet pre-flop. I mean, should be terrified of, and imminently hands like pocket. This is another pair, improves and eke out 5 outs to improve, that also has showdown value, 5x, 4x, ace-4, that kind of thing, ace-3 of hearts, all these kind of hands. So definitely think this is another clear value bet for us. After he checks, we bet 9 big blinds, he calls again, all for the better. Again, we're happy. Pot's 31.5, we're growing quite a nice pot here in the river. If we get a very nice card, we might be able to even eke out one more bet of value. Actually, we get the 6 of hearts, which does complete quite a few of the draws and probably makes it a bit harder for villain to call with worse. It's not just that this card actually going to connect with that evidence of that rule, which is fear. Sorry for the lack of political correctness there. I managed it on the last slide, but I forgot it in that slide. And or 3-better, and we check to the razor because they're likely to see bet, and we can trap that money in with all of their range and not have to like donk out and give them an easier decision about which parts they actually continue. Or another unless clause, like another thing that makes this rule false, would be the pot is already big enough to let a street go unbet, and hero's hand needs no protection. If the pot is huge and there's not much money left behind in the stacks, that can give you a license to slow play. It can give you a license to check, as we're going to see later, because there's less need to build the pot in that case. You can still get it all in by the river, even if you check the flop, or even if you check the turn, or whatever the situation happens to be. So in this kind of instance, the pot building part of things is not really as mandatory, because the pot is already built. There's only like 1 or 2 more bets to make, and as long as you've got space and time to make those without over betting or betting too large, then not saying that you can always check, but you certainly have more incentive to consider checking. However, if your hand did need protection, which is a concept that I talked about last time, and if you're a disastrous aggressive player who likes to bet when checked to, so this check is actually really disastrous by hero, because as per the golden rule, we do have a hand that's capable of getting 3 streets of value. Clearly against a stationary opponent, we can bet 3 times on Jack 8-6 and get called by all kinds of worse hands, like top pairs, draws, second pairs, you name it, could be anything. So by checking here, this is where the exponential mistake really comes in. We're not just losing a flop bet, we're actually, so now we're building the pot, but it's a little bit of a case of too little too late. The river's the 2 of diamonds, not just to play, so all in our favour, because now on the turn to 45, I think I thought it was 25 to 45, but no, it's actually an extra 25 big blinds, it's actually an extra 50 bucks. Now, I'm kind of being a bit tricky here, I'm kind of deceiving you guys a little bit, because this is not actually the EV, so that's to say that it's not going to be every single time that we make $50 more by making it this size. It might actually be closer to 40 that we get. And of course there are exceptions to it. I talked before about checking to an aggressive player because you know that they'll bet or something like that. That's all very well, but normally these kind of things aren't the case, and you definitely have to just, gets called just 25% of the time. Quite pessimistic, but I guess that could be true. So option 1, the $10 bet, what we do here is we times the amount by the free.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Pour le roi Lich, que le combat commence. À vos ordres. Que le combat commence. Quelle vengeance accomplie. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez que le combat commence.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
À vos ordres. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez que le combat commence.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites.
Où doit couler mon sang?
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Je suis l'enfer. Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis l'enfer. Par mon courroux.
Des infidèles attaquent notre ville. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Que le combat commence. Enfin.
Amélioration terminée.
Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Décidé.
Vous me demandez. Je suis l'enfer. roi Lich. Que le combat commence. Je suis...
Amélioration terminée. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Enfin. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Esprit de flamme.
Nous devons agir.
Enfin.
Enfin.
Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich. Je suis au ciel. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez.
Je suis au service de
Que le combat commence. Ma patience a des limites. Voulez-vous un cocktail qui dépote?
un héros allié à souffrir.
You're a catalyst, happiness, you know. 'Cause it's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood. And it's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood. 'Cause it's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping.
Frequency of call to determine the gain in EV on average of our bet. So our actual EV will be like much bigger than that because we'll win dead money that's in the pot as well. All this refers to is the gain in EV that we make from betting versus not betting. So the time that should read that exceptions to the golden rule. Sure, unless we're very sure that villain will bet, maybe we're sure that the above villain will bet, but not always are we that sure. Offering a free card can be a dangerous gesture on a wet board. Save a slow play check for a dry one. So we talked all about board texture last time. You should know aggressive, blow a size bet, and you've got villain very pot committed. Don't worry here, villain. If villain has a king, you will still get the money. What you're doing here is targeting a hand like this. So villain will call any top pair and probably a good few weaker hands if we bet. But what would he do with something like 6-5 of hearts? Probably a day or two. Not always. Like with everything in poker, there's a rule and there's an exception. Very few things are concrete, and very few things can be just, you know, summarized into one rule. Run good. We've already tackled the small blind is very often. When did the odds of actually? Is it good against the opening range? Perhaps ace jack suited, king queen suited, ace queen off, pocket 10, something like this that can survive on its own without having to flop like a monster. So you want hands calling. Alternatively, we might think that we dominate some hands in opener's range and we'll have the best hand very idea. It might be slightly better than folding in some instances. All in all, we think that by calling the button here, we're off. But again, if they 4-bet, they may be bluffing us. We might fold the best hand. If we fold, if we continue, we're obviously crushed against their value range, so they'd be 4-betting maybe like a kind of polarized range. It's either like really favorite against holding pre-dots. Ratio you want to be lower, what you pay, you want to be low compared with what you get back. Very simple, risk and reward, kind of the backbone of all of poker. Has a very strong range. We're talking about a hand like this pocket fives here. We're talking about a hand that can make a very strong hand, not often because you don't ever make it, but we think fold generally. It's very important that you raise and not call unless we have one of the following exceptions. Because you do want to 3-bet your best hands here, you don't want to call like pocket aces in the spot unless big blind is absolutely insane with the squeezing, then you might try and trap them, but very extreme exceptions here. Generally this is 3-bet or fold, and because the hand is good enough, it's going to be a 3-bet, and we're going to touch on that next time, or we're going to get into it in more depth next time and talk about why that is exactly. But if you're going to play a hand in the small blind in this kind of situation, it's very important that you raise and not call unless we have one of the following exceptions. Exception number 1. There's a weak player in the big blind who will play passively pre-flop and badly post-flop. In that case, with a weak player behind you who's less likely to squeeze and attack pots, it's now actually in our interest to get into multi-way pots. Our implied odds are better because we think the inferior player ahead of us is going to make a lot of mistakes and things like that, and therefore playing 3-way is not a curse as much as it would have been normally if there was a reg there. We're going to see the flop more often when we flat. Flatting might not be fantastic here, but in case the button raises to 5, a more aptly sized button open, though with a weak passive player in the big blind, I might be tempted to go to there. But if you're going to play a hand in the small blind in this kind of situation, maybe ping us off too much, all the good stuff in life and poker. We will get squeezed rarely now and see the flop close to 100% of the time. This purifies our equity because it gives us a higher realization factor for that equity. It means that more of our equity actually translates to making a strong hand at some point and getting money in the pot and winning with that equity, whereas if we get squeezed pre-flop, a lot of our equity. We do not want to blow the multi-way. If the opening range is strong, we're more likely to get paid off. Here's our example of this. So you might have steals. Blind here is actually mandatory. Squeezing would be ridiculous, like 3-betting this hand, you're just bloating the pot to then have to give up later probably in a 3 or 4-way pot anyway, if you don't expect a lot of fold equity. So I think this is absolutely fine. That red the blind versus is never really a nut straight. It can make a flush occasionally that's never a nut flush. It can make trips with a bad kicker. Whatever, I mean, these aren't great of the gap presiding over this situation and telling us that because this hand's at the bottom of the range that we would open from under the gun, and we expect this taggy player, this reg to open, tight aggressive player to open under the gun, that this should just be a fold, and it's not player to open under the gun, that this should just be a fence on us, that because this hand's at the bottom of the range that we would do often. Now there's a so now if you think about that, 2 big blinds into a pot that's already 7, we don't have to do very well at all here. In fact, if we can just win the pot on the flop, something like 20-25% of the time, you know, we'll be doing absolute self. That's very unfought odds dictate what happens in the hand to a larger extent. So versus a 2.5x open, we spend a lot of hands in this situation. And if villain tries to min steal from the small blind, we should fold almost nothing. Like, I mean, we should fold only the very, very worst hands. Those, even if we end here. Otherwise you'll get run over and you'll bleed far. Our hand might be a little then we'll What's up guys, Pete here and welcome back to Basics of 6 Max Cash. This is episode number 6 today, and we are gonna move ahead with one of the most complicated topics that you can actually deal with pre-flop in No Limit Hold'em 6 Max Cash games, which is going to be 3-betting. Word of warning, this topic, we're in a situation where we aren't going to range begins or ends. We're going to deal with that later on, but for now, if the guy's really tight, obviously less hands can be 3-bet for value. So linear and value, sorry, when we talked about c-betting, still linear, it's just it's got more of a just to use a value-oriented range instead. That's very standard and we're used to that by now. And then a value linear range is just one part, and it's above all of the other ranges, so it's above. But most of the time that we play 3-bet or fold linear, we'll be in the small blind, and some of these hands here in this orange 3-bet range are not clearly for value. That's why I've changed as to how villain plays. These are the hands we want to 3-bet, otherwise we shouldn't be 3-betting at all. And so 3-bet or fold linear might play in this specific spot after a weak aggressive player with presumably a wide raising range, right, if he's aggressive, opens 3 BBs in a hijack. Our primary aim here is isolation, And what we're favouring is playability. In fact, the EV of bigger cards are preferable, as are bigger pairs. These hands I've deemed minus EV to play in any way here, probably, given that we'll get squeezed behind sometimes. There's a rake to consider, and we're against a player that won't give us much fold equity if we take a passive line, so there's no point playing any of the cardboard kind of coloured hands here. Let's take a different example point playing any of the cardboard kind of coloured hands here. I'm going to talk about that today. That's the topic for next time. So this range is, again, linear in the sense that it's top heavy. It starts at the top and works away. That's why I favour passive elimination. Too good to call, that's the green hands there, or too bad to call, that's the red hands here. So that using a polar strategy, we are bluffing, and we're only using... Why do we do it? It allows us to play hands as 3-bet bluffs that would otherwise just be folds. Terrible. No. And we use hands that have blockers, that's to say like an ace or a value, and normally we will want to flat a bunch of hands against under the gun. Therefore, I recommend something along these lines. So what we're doing here is we're using, well, you can see that we're calling the very best kind of suited cards, the blue range. We'll start at the top. We're 3-betting queens plus ace king for value. We only think we'll be in good shape with a very strong hand if villain continues to a 3-bet. He might be opening like a, I don't know, 15% from under the gun, but he's continuing a lot tighter to a 3-bet than that. So again, don't make the very, very common, horrendous blunder of saying ace queen suited is ahead of his range so I can 3-bet for value. No, you can't. You need to be ahead after you get called. Otherwise it wasn't for value, was it? It was for fold equity, and why do that with ace queen when you could do that with ace 5 suited that you can't call with? Why waste ace queen suited as a bluff when you don't do good hand? These are calls either for implied odds, high equity. You'll become too exploitative and villain will stop folding, you'll lose your fold equity, you'll lose that long-term EV, and it will not be so good for you in the long run to do that. Okay guys, that takes us to the end of this episode, really a crash course on 3-bet range shapes, why, when, how and what they actually are, and next week we're going to move on to facing 3-bets. Students think that they are 5, which has % off your opening range. So what it looks like, depending on the needs and wants of the spot, we're going to fold the bottom, the weakest 55% of our 3 and 3.5 times the open, depending on positions. Main theoretical implication here is that we cannot allow this raise to be profitable for villain, or we will become exploitable. So in theory, if so our job as opener is to ensure that anyone who is aggressive or exploitatively aware cannot gain any EV by 3-betting wider than a solid strike. If he's in the big blind here, it's going to be whatever he's adding to that big blind to try and win the pot, not the big blind he's already invested. That's not point of decision. And it'll be that risk divided by his risk plus his reward. And the reward there is the amount of money he wins when he actually gets the pot, so when we fold pre-flop. So in this case, if it was like ones that estimate down, so our opening range can be segregated into different parts. So again, we're going to fold 55% to the 3-bet in a basic balance model, and at the top we're going to 4-bet, but not amazing hands. So we will 4-bet only very strong hands and then bluffs, hence polar. Polar means polarized, it means there's two extremes, the north and the south pole, there's a bunch of stuff in the middle. It's to 8, very good hand anymore, because ranges have filtered justly and sensibly to the point that 10s is now in bad shape. So we don't just 4-bet and stack off with 10s unless we're against someone who we know will felt a very wide range himself. Blue hands are our calls. Again, they're quite good, but they're not so good that we want to 4-bet them for any reason. We don't want to actually squander any of these hands as bluffs because we think they're good enough to call. The red hands are not good enough to call, so these are the 4-bet bluffs in the spectrum we just looked at. They're too weak to flat, but they are the best of the worst. They're better than the kind of the light blue hands below them, which are going to be our folds. These make up, looking at these percentages, our 4-bets for value are about 5% of our range, our calls are about 31%, and our 4-bet bluffs are 7%. Add all of those up and you get 31, you know, kind of ratio, even though with 3-bets and 9, another very standard spot, 3x in position is the most common sort of sizing you're likely to see. Here we have our hijack opening range, which is a lot tighter in the first place, you can see that, right? And again, we split it up systematically. We 4-bet 14% of the range now because it's a stronger range, so more of it wants to get warned, that I warned you about earlier. Don't want that to be a good idea, that's why we're forced to defend these hands, even if they're not fantastic defense, they're hopefully okay, but they just want to be somewhere close to it, and that's a solid strategy. We're not folding too much, we're not folding too little, we're making it neither a good nor bad idea for a villain to 3-bet us some way that we can, and it sounded like a tech in a smaller deal. We think it's just profitable for us to call battle for pots when we miss. It's more just fit or full, no set, no bet. Want to think of something that rounds with no flush, no something else, but so we call 9, we're only investing 9. If we do hit something big with this hand, we can potentially win like another $185 or something. So certainly there's good implied odds here. We think this player will play badly after the flop. So by calling this 3-bet, we're not trying to meet the sensible defense frequency. We're simply taking advantage of favourable implied odds in position at this spot. It's exploitative because we are not thinking long term here about our strategy. We're just saying this guy's not very good. He gave us a great price. We know we can call. The last spot, we don't really have good implied odds here because the 9 big blind investment is actually quite a lot. It's a lot more. Even queens against this nifty player, we're probably going to be up against kings or aces quite often, right? So we're actually just going into our shell here and folding all the time because we believe that he's playing. Not exaggerate here. It doesn't have to be the exact amount. It's just what this came out as because we're playing every hand here. Kind of in a vacuum. We're kind of saying like, what is best to do here with queens? I don't care about the implications of that because villain is not. Let's imagine that we open the button to 2 big blinds. So again, these under and over folding terms, they all relate to the 55% folding. So an out of, so maybe he's really attacking, like he 5 bets a bit wider and jacks should stand up okay when it gets all in, so we're okay with that. We call wide using our position to help us punish his. Okay, I've crammed quite a lot into this video. I've moved at a quick pace in peak characters Clark.
Les damnés sont à vos ordres. Ma vie pour vous les damnés sont à vos ordres. Ma vie pour pas invoquer ici. Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Il faut plus
Avec
d'or.
plaisir. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. Où doit-on pas s'invoquer ici? L'invocation est accomplie.
Il faut plus d'or. Le bac est signé. Que le combat commence.
L'invocation
Par
est
mon
accomplie.
gourou. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Enfin. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience patience a des limites.
Vos ordres,
Je ne peux pas
maître.
invoquer ici.
Je suis ma patience a des limites.
Il faut plus d'or.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez que le combat commence. À vos ordres.
Vous avez sonné. Il est temps. Nul ne détruit
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Que le combat commence. Enfin.
qui menace la nature. Vos ordres.
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Je ferai selon vos ordres. Où doit couler amélioration terminée. Votre volonté.
Ma patience a des limites.
Vos ordres, maître. Oui,
Vous me demandez. Bien sûr.
vos ordres. Serré.
Ma patience a des limites.
Damnés sont à vos ordres.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Pour le roi Lich.
Terminé.
Ma patience a des limites. Je suis
Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Vous me demandez. À vos ordres.
Où doit couler mon sang.
Vous me demandez.
Vous avez sonné.
Ma patience a des limites. Enfin. Par mon coup. Bien sûr. Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich.
Je suis prête.
L'invocation est L'invocation
Arrête, me rend plus fort. Enfin.
Je suis au service de Ner'zhul. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. Je suis ma patience a des limites.
À vos ordres.
Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites.
Selon
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
décidé par des
Ma patience a des limites.
à vos ordres.
Quelle vengeance
Je suis au service de
que le combat commence. le combat commence.
Pour vous servir, pas invoquer. Amélioration terminée. Il faut plus d'or.
Patience a des limites.
Je suis au service de Nelson.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez,
Recherche terminée.
vous me demandez, quelle vengeance accomplie.
L'invocation. Pour vous servir. Avec plaisir. Je suis
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez,
recherche terminée.
quelle vengeance accomplie. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Vous me demandez, que le combat commence.
L'invocation.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez, ma patience a des limites.
Pas d'objection. L'invocation est
Quelle vengeance.
Nos forces sont attaquées. Recherche terminée. Je suis au service de Nelson. J'ai entendu
Vous me demandez, à vos ordres, quelle vengeance accomplie. Ner'zhul. Que le combat commence. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Enfin.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Quelle vengeance accomplie.
À vos ordres.
Pour le roi Lich. Vous me demandez.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Vous me demandez.
Je suis au service de Nelson.
Que le combat commence.
Je vous sers.
Enfin.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Enfin. Ma patience
You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive. You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive. You keep waiting. You keep waiting. You keep waiting. You keep waiting. You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive. You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive.
Je ferai selon vos ordres. Oui, maître. Les damnés sont à vos ordres. Droit Collins. Les damnés sont à vos ordres. Pour vous servir. Droit Collins. Votre volonté sera faite avec plaisir. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie.
patience a des limites.
Vos ordres, maître. Il faut plus d'or.
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Enfin.
Amélioration. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Je suis l'enfer. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Enfin.
Il est temps. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Vous me demandez. À vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Ta haine me rend plus fort. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez.
L'invocation est
Ma patience a des limites. Bien sûr. Que le combat commence.
Qui menace la nature?
Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Enfin.
En position. Absolument. Je suis prête.
Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites.
La nature est à vos ordres. Qui menace la nature? Par les esprits. Pour Kalimda.
Vous me demandez. Je suis. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Vos ordres. Nos forces sont attaquées.
patience a des limites.
J'écoute. Il faut plus d'or.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Je suis
Ma patience a des limites.
J'écoute.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Enfin. Je suis. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Amélioration terminée.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Je suis.
Vos ordres.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez.
Je suis aussi.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez.
J'écoute.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. Ta haine me rend plus fort.
Je viens des profondeurs. Recherche terminance et sans égal. J'ai entendu
Vous me demandez.
vos ordres. Il est temps. À vos ordres.
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez.
Recherche terminée. Ma vie pour berger.
Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Où doit couler
L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma patience a des limites.
Je suis aussi.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Je ne sers que le
Ma patience a des limites. Oh, merci. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Encore. Ma patience a des limites.
Je ne sers.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Enfin.
Recherche.
Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle Ma patience a des limites.
L'invocation est
patience a des limites. Que le combat commence.
La ville de l'Omrail est attaquée. Nos forces sont attaquées.
Patience a des limites.
and Ruby Beastie, we have the positional advantage. You have too wide of a
It's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood. And it's your heart, it's alive, it's pumping blood. We all wanna run in, drive is wrong.
This is Pete Curtis Clark, and welcome back to Basics of Six Max Cash episode number 8 today, where we are going to be dealing with the dreaded C-bet, a bet that we've already learned how to utilize ourselves, and now we're going to go to the other side and figure out how we can deal with it when our opponents make
You're the starter of the world that you get to know.
act after the flop, and this bet can be made for a variety of different reasons.
It's pumping blood.
When no surprises here at showdown. So if we call down 3 times, or a villain stops betting at some point and we check and he checks back and we get to showdown, we have the best hand, we win due to our showdown value. So to win at showdown you need to have a hand that can beat things like misdraws, can beat things like bluffs or very bad pairs or ace highs and things like that, depending on the texture. On a wet board or semi-wet board, I guess like this, like showdown values, the requirements are a little bit more stringent. On a drier flop, some ace highs and stuff can be shown in all villains. Would be something like ace of spades, 8 of diamonds. We would absolutely play this way. We flatten the 2 big blind open because we would defend this to steal. This is all in episode number 6 on Common Opens. If you flop and then c-bet advantage, you do kind of have to just against the right opponent in the right situation. And the belief here would be that villain is going to give up on the pot fairly often if he doesn't have a good hand on the turn. We don't want to call this hand on the flop against players who are hyper aggressive who are going to bet the turn all day, because if we're calling the flop for the turn, we're literally just donating money. We'll be able to do the pot later. Whereas when you have pot odds and implied odds, especially implied odds, it's more likely that you are getting paid off later, which would indicate that you have less folding. So usually, unless stacks are very short, you will win extra money when you do get paid off, and there will be a degree of hand or draw. We float when we think that we have enough future folding plus playability to call for the pot odds offered. Floating is possible both in and out of position, but has a high rating in position. If villain checks later on, we have no showdown value, that's his TV, you should bet to try and pick up the pot. So the float is not because we think we have a great hand, but necessarily a really huge pot. Very often when then we're open in this spot, button versus cutoff. We're the button, he's the cutoff, and we face a c-bet in a heads-up pot. Villain is a rig who we know c-bets too much out of position. And out of position, like we saw in episode number 4, we have to be quite careful about how much we c-bet, because it's more profitable for our opponent. Winner is going to have a lot of air here. Hands like ace 4 of diamonds, or just complete ace 5 and stuff. His hand calls, also blocks and removes villain's combinations of things like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, king jack, king 10, hands that we'd rather didn't have because they're fairly decent. Ace 10 of spade, put a value on that kind of against someone who will give up a lot later. Should be easily profitable. Block by calling. Sure, the spot here that we're talking about is not too important. Just imagine villains raised from some position. We've called conscious of that before you go and just. And this has a few benefits for that time where we better start raising never to build the pot. But for now, there's nothing wrong with just calling here and slow playing the hand for one street if the texture is like this, especially in position, and especially when we think villain's going to be betting again on the turn and river. On a dry board, the pre-flop razor retains a large range advantage, as it's harder to flop a strong hand. Having a range pre-flop razor can have the point number 3. Calling very strong and vulnerable hands like ace 4 of clubs here keeps up range betting. And the idea here is that we don't have any interest in building the pot with medium hands like queen jack. Rather, what we want to do is build the pot with 10 to get scared off later by not getting there, and a value hand can get scared off by a draw getting there. A 10 turn is highly destructive for us when we have pocket 7s. Raising now is solid, because now we're not suffering from that range disadvantage that we had on the last board. Now we're not building a pot range versus range with a disadvantage. We're doing a bluff. There's a value. The flop comes blind versus blind as ace 7 rainbow and all different suits. Pot strong hand here because we 3-bet many of our decent ace 6 pre-flop. Wouldn't be blind versus blind. We 3-bet ace jack, ace queen, also has a ton of air just like we do. So the most normal case here is that both players have flopped nothing. So if we just fold every time we flop nothing, his nothing beats our nothing through fold equity, he wins all of our money, slowly through building up a pot and then taking it down. We can't allow that. So we must find the best of the worst to float. We saw how we do that earlier. We call and then try to also call lots of nets.
Ma vie pour Ner'zhul. Je peux destin essayer. Avec plaisir. Les damnés sont à vos ordres.
There, feel free to go back and rewatch it, leave me any comments or questions you may have, and I'll see you guys very soon for episode 9, when we're going to look a little bit more at turn and river play. This has been Pete, Star School. See you in the next one. Good luck at the tables.
Je ferai selon vos ordres. Mon destin est scellé.
Right, so then we're going to talk is actually bluffs based on using the right cards for our own range to make sure that we end up bluffing a decent frequency of the time and not just bluff with any old 2 brags that we have in front of us because we feel like it. So that's the important thing. In this part of the vid, however, a draw that you have on the turn will whiff the vast majority of the time. There. So hero opens a cutoff with King of Spades, Queen of Hearts to 2.5 BBs. Standard cutoff sizing, as you recall. Hero bets 8 big blinds into 11.5. Looks good. There'll be some fold equity with this bet. There'll be ways of improving if we don't get the fold. So we're just giving ourselves a multitude of different ways that we are improved there, but it's not a strong value hand, it's somewhere between those worlds. The flop because we had middle pair. We also had a backdoor flush draw, which we then actually made. We didn't make the flush, we made a flush draw on the turn. And the most important thing of this hand is that we draw here. Maybe this is a better bet against the because you already beat most of the hands in fold. And protection, well, your hand is very invulnerable, there's nothing can come in the room. Do fairly okay-ish things, do not medium pairs, bad, or might consider it. You can see if the in a vacuum, if you like. We're kind of thinking, yes, this will be a profitable bluff. They are not bluffing enough, they are under bluffing, so to speak. You do this, but solid player will never fall. And he probably doesn't have here when he flats in the big blind.
Le pacte est signé. Je suis l'enfer. Que le combat commence. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Pour le roi Lich, ma patience a des limites. Vous en rendez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Enfin. patience a des limites.
Vous allez adorer ma nouvelle recette. Passez-moi le shaker. Je m'occupe du mélange.
Ma patience a des limites.
Démonstration avec
Ma patience a des limites. Nos forces sont attaquées. La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Voulez-vous un cocktail qui dépote?
Ma patience a des limites.
je suis au service de Ner'zhul.
À vos ordres.
Je suis au service de
Vous me demandez. Enfin. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis l'enfer.
le dormeur serré.
Vous me demandez. Je suis l'enfer. Pour le roi Lich. Ma patience a des limites.
Amélioration terminée.
Vous me demandez.
J'écoute.
Ma patience a des limites.
Aux ordres.
Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Vos ordres.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Plus d'or.
Vous me demandez.
Il faut plus d'or.
Ma patience a des limites.
Décidez. À vos ordres.
Ma patience a des limites.
J'écoute.
Vous me demandez.
Vos ordres.
Vous me demandez.
Je suis au service de Ner'zhul.
Je suis.
À vos ordres.
Ma patience a des limites.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée. Écoute. Je ne sers que le trône de glace.
Quelle chose accomplie.
Recherche terminée. Je suis au service de Ner'zhul.
Pour le roi Lich. patience a des limites.
J'ai accompli les invocations. Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. limites. Vous me demandez,
Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Dressez plus de ziggourats.
ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez,
Je suis
selon vos désirs. Vous me demandez, vous me demandez,
ma puissance est sans égale.
Il faut plus d'or.
l'invocation.
Parlez,
Vous me demandez, ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez,
j'ai entendu les invocations.
ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez, à vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle chose accomplie. Ma patience a des limites.
Soldier on the red line, it's up to you. Love is nothing like time, nothing like waiting for.
You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive. You keep waiting for another time. Can you keep it down? Hold yourself alive. You keep waiting. You keep waiting.
Je ferai selon vos ordres. Votre volonté sera faite. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. Merci pour Ursule. Avec plaisir. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. Pour vous servir. L'invocation est accomplie.
Le pacte est signé.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Vous me demanderez.
Amélioration terminée.
Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Toi, je le sauver.
Si vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Ner'zhul. Ma patience a des limites. Que le combat commence. Pour le roi Lich. Je suis par mon coup. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. À vos fort. Pour le roi Lich. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Ma patience a des limites. Que le combat commence. Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance. Ma patience a des limites.
Amélioration terminée.
Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance.
Nos forces sont attaquées.
Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance. Par mon courroux. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis
Vos ordres paraissent. Je ferai selon vos ordres.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites.
À vos ordres.
Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Le destin.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis le seul. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ta haine me rend plus fort.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Ma patience a des limites. À vos ordres. Que le combat commence. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Que le combat commence. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
Amélioration terminée.
Ma patience a
Je
des
suis au
limites.
service du Ner'zhul.
Quelle vengeance accomplie. Ma patience a des limites. a des limites. Je suis patience à des limites. Vous me demandez. Oh. L'invocation.
Je le sais.
Vous me demandez. Pour le roi Lich. À vos ordres. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Que le combat commence. Je suis l'enfer. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée. Ma vie pour Ner'zhul. Le temps.
Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. À vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Je suis vos ordres. Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich.
Enfin, je suis au service de Ner'zhul. Je ne sers que le trône de glace.
Ma patience a des limites.
L'invocation est accomplie.
Vous me demandez. Je suis. Vous me demandez. Pour le roi Lich. Je suis l'enfer.
damnés sont à vos ordres. Ma vie peut être mal ici. Où doit couler le sang invoqué ici? L'invocation est à ferai selon vos ordres. Mon destin est scellé. L'invocation est accomplie. L'invocation est accomplie. Vos ordres, maître, avec plaisir. Il faut plus d'or. La ville de nos pères est attaquée. Ce qui doit être sera. Continuez. Décidez. Le pacte est signé. La ville de nos frères est attaquée. À vos ordres. L'invocation est accomplie. La patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich. Vous me demandez. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Patience a des limites. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Je suis par mon gourou. À vos ordres. Bien sûr. Pour le roi Lich. À vos ordres. Décidez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Je suis l'enfer. Vous me demandez. Ma vie peut pas se ici. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Que le combat commence. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Des anges. Ce qui doit être sera. Ma patience a des limites. Ner'zhul. Enfin. Pour le roi Lich. Enfin. Nos forces sont attaquées. L'invocation est accomplie. Nos forces sont attaquées. Vous me demandez. Pour le roi Lich. Quelle vengeance accomplie.
patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Taille me rend plus fort.
Amélioration terminée. 3 problèmes au sang.
Ma patience a des limites. Enfin. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez. Décidez. Ma patience a des limites.
Un héros allié a succombé.
Quel vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites. Pour le roi Lich. Que le combat commence.
Il faut plus d'or.
Vous me demandez. L'invocation. Un de fort.
Il faut plus d'or.
Ma patience a des limites. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Que le combat commence.
Pour vous servir.
Je suis au service. Pour le roi Lich.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Ma patience a des limites. Coup.
Il en soit ainsi. Je suis au service de Ner'zhul. La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Ma patience a des limites.
Recherche terminée.
L'invocation. Je suis prêt. Me rend plus fort. Ner'zhul.
La ville de nos frères est attaquée.
Par mon coup. Ma patience a des limites. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Quelle vengeance accomplie. Vous me demandez. Ner'zhul.
Je suis au service.
Ma patience a des limites. Ta haine me rend plus fort. Vous me demandez. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez. Que le combat commence. Pour Ner'zhul. À vos ordres. Vous me demandez. Ta haine me rend plus fort.
Je suis au service de Ner'zhul.
Ma patience a des limites.
Recherche. Un héros allié a succombé.
À vos ordres. Ma patience relie. Enfin. Ma patience, géniale.
Il faut plus d'or.
Je suis pour le roi Lich.
Amélioration.
L'invocation de quel je suis patience à détruire.
Notre héros a succombé.
Been walking in the dark long enough to know. Finally seeing the light. Been around long enough to know. No more need. Even the blind man can tell. Walking in the sun. Walking in the sun. Walking in the sun. Well, the wind is at my back, and I'm sailing on a ship that's overdue. Well, I've blown so many chances that I ain't gonna blow this chance. Been losing long enough to know when I find one. Even the blind man can tell. Walking in the sun. Walking in the sun. Walking in the sun.
Quoi? Je peux le faire. Ouais. Avec plaisir. Impossible de travail. Encore du travail. Prêt à travailler. Prêt à travailler. Quoi? Prêt. Prêt à travailler. Quoi? Prêt. Prêt à travailler. Travail terminé. Travail terminé. Quoi? Prêt à travailler. Ouais. Okidoki. Prêt à travailler. Du travail, encore du travail. Que dois-je faire? Oui. Quoi? Okidoki. Oui. Ma hache est prête pour mes ancêtres. Quoi? Je peux le faire. Que dois-je faire? Oui. Travail terminé. Travail terminé. Travail terminé.
Devoir aller
pour mes ancêtres. Travail terminé.
Quoi? Notre héros a été comme vengeance pour Soulzy. Comme vous vouloir. Vous dire, il faut plus d'or. Quoi moi devoir faire? Vengeance pour moi devoir tuer. Quoi? Qui moi devoir tuer? Vengeance pour Soulzy.
Je suis prêt. Que puis-je pour vous? Je suis prêt. Mes ordres, un excellent plan. Mes ordres, oui, chef. Un excellent plan pour mes ancêtres. devoir faire? On va terminer. Personne. Quoi? Que puis-je pour vous? Je suis prêt. Pour mes ancêtres, que puis-je pour vous? Vos ordres. Recherche terminée. Que puis-je? Crois-moi devoir faire. Oui. Vengeance pour Soulzy. Je suis prêt. Très bien. Oui. Vos ordres. Oui, chef. Mes ordres. Dis-moi devoir tuer. Vengeance pour Soulzy. Dis-moi devoir aller. Mes ancêtres. Il faut à moi devoir bientôt souffrir. Je suis prêt. Un excellent plan. Vos ordres. Je suis prêt. Pour mes ancêtres. Mes ordres. Que puis-je pour vous? Vos ordres. Je suis prêt. Mes ordres. L'honneur. Nous sommes attaqués. Impossible de construire ici. Vengeance. Quoi? Recherche terminée. Où moi devoir aller? Que puis-je? Vos ordres. Mes ordres. Pour mes ancêtres. Quoi? Vengeance pour Soulzy. Pour mes ancêtres. Vengeance pour Soulzy. Mes ordres. Pour mes ancêtres. Où moi devoir aller? Que puis-je pour vous? Je suis prêt. Que puis-je pour vous? Oui, chef. Pour les tribus. Pour mes moi devoir faire. Je suis prêt. Où moi devoir aller? Quoi? Pour mes ancêtres. Quoi moi devoir faire? Quoi? Mes ancêtres. Oui, impossible de construire ici. Vos ordres, un excellent plan. Oui, chef. Que puis-je pour vous? Amélioration terminée. Vengeance pour Soulzy. Nous sommes attaqués. Vos ordres, je suis prêt. Vos ordres. Quoi moi devoir faire? Qui moi devoir tuer? Quoi? Où moi devoir aller? Qui moi devoir tuer? Quoi moi devoir faire? Quoi? Quoi moi devoir faire? Vengeance pour Soulzy. Vous vouloir. Quoi moi devoir faire? Qui moi devoir tuer? Recherche terminée. Où moi devoir aller? Qui moi devoir tuer? Quoi? Sang et chair. Quoi moi devoir faire? Qui moi devoir tuer? Où moi devoir aller? Qui moi devoir tuer? impossible de construire une... Recherche terminée. Dis-moi devoir tuer. Que puis-je pour mes ancêtres? Aux ordres. Nous sommes attaqués. Je suis prêt pour mes ancêtres. Oui-je? Sur le champ. Prêt à travailler. Je peux le faire. Que puis-je pour vous? Un excellent plan. Aux ordres. Que puis-je pour vous? Que puis-je pour vous? Travail terminé. Que dois-je faire? Oui. Puissent mes ancêtres adoucir. Aux ordres. Il faut plus de bois. Que puis-je pour vous? Je suis prêt. Prêt à travailler. La ville de notre allié est attaquée. Quoi? Pour les tribus. Pour vos ordres. Mes ordres. Recherche terminée. Au mois de voir, la ville de notre allié est attaquée. Je suis prêt. Que puis-je pour mes ancêtres? Que dois-je faire?